I never expected my past to walk into my courtroom in handcuffs. One second, I was just another judge on just another case. And the next, I was staring into the eyes of the boy who once swore he'd always have my back. They said he was a criminal, accused of a violent robbery. But I knew another version of him, one the world had long forgotten. Could both truths exist in the same man? What happened next would shake not just the trial, but everything I thought I believed about justice. Most days in court felt the same. The shuffle of papers, the low murmur of voices, the steady rhythm of cases rising and falling like waves. I prided myself on being composed, a pillar of fairness in a system that often felt anything but. To those watching from the gallery, I was Judge Eleanor Hayes, calm, precise, untouchable. But outside the robe, I was just a woman trying to hold it all together. Early mornings with coffee gone cold before I could finish it. Evenings spent, staring at case files that blurred into one another. It wasn't glamorous. It was routine. And routine was safe. At least it was, until the bailiff called the next case. The name echoed in the chamber like a ghost, James Anderson. My pulse quickened. For a moment, I thought it had to be a coincidence. But when the defendant stepped forward, shackled and weary, the truth slammed into me. It was him. The boy I'd once trusted with my secrets, now standing accused of crimes I could hardly reconcile with the person I remembered. The courtroom suddenly felt smaller, heavier, as if the air itself knew this was no ordinary trial. And I had no idea just how far the past was about to bleed into the present. The moment James raised his head and our eyes met, the air in that courtroom shifted. His face was worn, older than I remembered. But those eyes, the same eyes that once dreamed of leaving our small town behind, were unmistakable. I forced myself to stay steady, but inside, a storm was breaking loose. The charges were laid out, like cold facts: robbery, assault, resisting arrest. The prosecutor spoke as though James were nothing more than a statistic, another name on a docket. Yet every word cut through me. I wanted to interrupt, to ask questions that had no place in a courtroom. What happened to you, James? How did we end up here on opposite sides of the bench? Lisa Porter, his defense attorney, was sharp and unflinching, young, but with a voice that carried a quiet conviction. She pushed back on every claim, questioning witnesses with precision, forcing cracks into the prosecution's polished surface. A store clerk's memory faltered under cross-examination. Surveillance footage, grainy and unreliable, was far from the proof the state claimed it was, but still, the weight of perception was against him. Shackles clinked when he moved. Jurors stole wary glances. Even without evidence, the shadow of guilt seemed to cling to him. I could feel it seeping into the room. That invisible bias we rarely admit exists. Each day of testimony drew me deeper into conflict. As judge, I was bound to impartiality. But as Eleanor, the girl who once sat under magnolia trees with James, laughing about futures bigger than Hammond, I was drowning. Memories intruded when I least expected. His grin after catching a fish, his quiet courage when neighbors whispered about our friendship. And now, here he was, painted as violent, dangerous. The defense fought hard. Lisa pressed the arresting officer, Daniel Harris, until his story began to unravel. No red hoodie was ever recovered. The suspect's description had been vague. Protocol had replaced real investigation. A forensic expert raised doubts about the altered timestamp on the security footage. Piece by piece, the foundation of the case began to shake. Yet with every revelation, the prosecution doubled down. They leaned on fear, on the image of a man in chains, and I saw the jurors wrestle with their own doubts, caught between evidence that faltered and a narrative too familiar to ignore. When James took the stand, the room stilled. His voice was rough, but steady. "I've made mistakes," he admitted. But I didn't do this. I was walking home that night. They didn't see me. They just saw someone who fit. His words weren't rehearsed. They carried the raw edge of a man tired of being misjudged. I felt my throat tighten. This wasn't just testimony. It was a plea. Not only for freedom, but for recognition. For humanity. The tension in that courtroom was no longer confined to the case. It had become personal. For James. For me. For everyone watching, wondering whether justice could be more than just procedure on paper. And as the defense prepared their final witnesses, I realized the trial was no longer about evidence alone. It was about whether the system itself could be trusted to see past its own blind spots. But the truth was about to collide with something far more dangerous than doubt. The courtroom was silent, charged with the kind of tension you could almost taste. The jury leaned forward. Reporters scribbled furiously. Every eye was fixed on James as Lisa called her final witness. It wasn't another expert. It wasn't even a clerk or bystander. It was James himself, standing once more, chains rattling. As he steadied his hands on the witness stand, his voice cracked but carried. I've lived my whole life fighting against labels. Trouble, thief, criminal. I've been called all of it. But I am more than a file in someone's cabinet. More than a shadow on a grainy tape. And if you can't see that, then maybe justice isn't real after all. The words landed like a hammer blow. For a moment, even the prosecutor faltered. The courtroom air grew heavy, pressing down on us all. I could see the jurors shifting, their expressions torn between doubt and conviction. The prosecutor rose for cross-examination, sharp and unrelenting. So you expect us to believe that every piece of evidence, every testimony, is wrong? That you, a man with a record, just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time? James's eyes met mine. Steady, defiant, wounded. Yes, he said simply. Because that's exactly what happened. Silence. A silence so thick it drowned out even the scratch of pens. My gavel trembled in my grip. For the first time in years, I felt the robe on my shoulders not as a shield, but as a weight. The law demanded distance. My heart demanded something else. And in that instant, I knew. No verdict could truly erase what was broken here. The jury withdrew to deliberate. Minutes bled into hours. The room filled and emptied with restless murmurs. And then at last, the foreperson rose, verdict slip in hand, voice shaking. In the case of the state of Louisiana versus James Anderson, we find the defendant. The pause stretched like a knife. My chest clenched. The room held its breath. Not guilty. The chamber erupted. Gasps, cheers, shouts of disbelief. I slammed my gavel, but even its crack couldn't silence the storm. James sagged forward, the chains no longer a sentence but a reminder of how close he had come to losing everything. I sat frozen, staring at him, knowing this wasn't victory. Not really. This was survival. Barely. And as he was unshackled, his eyes flickered to mine, carrying both gratitude and a question that would haunt me long after the courtroom cleared. Because the real trial was just beginning. When the jury filed out and the last gavel strike echoed into silence, the courtroom slowly emptied. Reporters rushed to meet deadlines. Clerks stacked papers into neat, forgettable piles. But I remained frozen on the bench, watching James sign, his release. He moved with a strange mixture of relief and weariness, as though freedom itself carried weight. For a moment, I thought he'd walk straight past me without a word. Then he stopped, standing just a few feet from the bench. You knew me, he said quietly. All this time, you knew. I opened my mouth, but the words tangled in my throat. Finally, I whispered, I couldn't. If I had said anything, it might have cost you everything. His expression softened. but only slightly. Fair, he repeated. That's the thing, Eleanor. The world's never been fair, not for people like me. I wanted to tell him I was sorry. That I'd failed him years ago, when I walked away as a teenager. That I'd failed again by hiding behind rules while he sat in shackles. But apologies felt small in the face of decades of silence. James gave a faint nod, then turned and walked. Out, the courthouse doors swinging shut behind him. His footsteps echoed in my chest long after he was gone. I sat there, staring at the polished wood of the bench, realizing something I'd never let myself admit. The law could deliver a verdict, but it could never guarantee justice. Justice demanded more than rules. It demanded courage, the kind James had shown as a boy, the kind I hadn't found until it was too late. That night, I stood on the courthouse steps as the sun dipped low, shadows stretching long across the pavement. I made a vow to myself. I couldn't rewrite our past, but I could fight for a different future. For him, for every person the system too easily condemned, because behind every case number was a life, behind every charge was a story, and behind every verdict was a choice, one that could either preserve the cycle or break it. James walked out free that day, but I walked out changed. The question that lingers, the one I still ask myself, is this. When the system calls for silence, how far are we willing to go to make sure justice finally speaks?